Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Dear friends, welcome to this Sutta study at the Dhammadharini Monastery. We are continuing with Death Awareness Month by looking at the teaching that the Buddha gave on the occasion of the parinibbana, or the full extinguishment of his disciple Sariputta. I'm going to bring us right into the sutta. I shall share the screen so that you can look at it. This is called the Cunda Sutta with Cunda. It's in the Samyutta Nikaya, the linked discourses, number 47.13. And the following Sutta, 47.14, is very similar and completes the story. This is a brief sutta, so we'll have time to really reflect about the wonderful teaching given here. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. At that time, Venerable Sariputta was staying in the Magadhan lands near the little village of Nalaka, and he was sick, suffering, gravely ill. The novice Cunda was his carer. That would be his upatak. Then Venerable Sariputta became fully extinguished because of that sickness. This is Bhikkhu Sujata's translation for the parinibbana. Then Cunda took Sariputta's bowl and robes and set out for Savatthi. He went to see Venerable Ananda at Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery, bowed, sat down on one side, and said to him, "Sir, Venerable Sariputta has become fully extinguished. This is his bowl and robe." Venerable Cunda, we should see the Buddha about this matter. In the Pali, we should see the Bhagava. That's like an honorific term for the one whom we hold in the worshipful esteem, the venerated one. Come, let's go to the Buddha and inform him about this. Yes, sir, replied Cunda. Then Ananda and Cunda went to see the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, this novice Cunda says that Venerable Sariputta has become fully extinguished. This is his bowl and robe." This is Ananda speaking. "Since I heard this, my body feels like it's drugged. I'm disoriented. The teachings don't spring to mind." The Buddha answers, "Well, Ananda, when Sariputta became fully extinguished, did he take away your entire spectrum of ethical conduct, of immersion, of wisdom, of freedom, or of the knowledge and vision of freedom?" The Pali word khanda, which is sometimes called an aggregate or a group, so the aggregate of ethical conduct, of samadhi, which is a word that we feel is best to leave untranslated because all of the English translations are confusing. Samadhi is sometimes translated as concentration. referring to the full absorption in meditation of wisdom. That's called panya, of freedom, or of the knowledge and vision of freedom. That's vimutti is freedom. Jnana dasana, knowing and seeing that freedom. No, sir, he did not, Venerable Ananda says, but Venerable Sariputta was my advisor and counselor. He educated, encouraged, fired up, and inspired me. He never tired of teaching the Dhamma, and he supported his spiritual companions. I remember the nectar of the teachings, the richness of the teaching, the support of the teaching given by Venerable Sariputta. So here we are, I think we have the chance to consider, this is one of the aspects of our death contemplation, is the, maybe this is one of the nutriments of friendship with our spiritual friends, our beautiful friends, the noble friends, the Kalyana Mita, our web of connectivity with those ones in society who are, you could say that in household life, the ones who are dear and delightful to us, the ones that we love and depend on for comfort, for our livelihood, for companionship, and so forth. And then in the realm of the Dhamma, those who we depend on to show us the way. Both they, having realized the insight into the Dhamma, they can explain it. They can apply the Dhamma that they understand to the variety of different circumstances and situations, and they can manifest their understanding and insight into the Dhamma with the way that they are in the world, the way that they interact, so that not only are you verbally hearing the words that they say, but you're seeing them and watching them and seeing how they react, how they respond, the subtleties, even through like a psychological or a mental transmission. Being in the presence of that kind of a noble friend is so valuable, for especially if we are one. In this case, Ananda has the stream entry, but he's not a fully enlightened arhat at this time. And so he is showing by his still having the grief and distress at the loss of his good friend. He's showing that he had that dependency, that he needed the support of his good friend, and then he feels the loss. He feels mentally disturbed by that loss. The next sutta that we're going to read in a few minutes is giving a contrast to the Buddha's homage or his praise of Sariputta, but the Buddha saying that he himself did not experience any grief or disturbance because of Sariputta's death. Now the Buddha gives his counseling. Ananda, did I not prepare you for this when I explained that we must be parted and separated from all we hold dear and beloved? This line is one of the 5 reflections that should be reflected upon again and again by all persons. Sabbehi me piehi manapehi nana bhavo vina bhavo anyata bhavo. Everything dear and pleasing will become parted from us, will become separated from us, will become different. The Buddha goes on, how could it possibly be so that what is born, created, conditioned, and liable to wear out should not wear out? That is not possible. So this is one of the ways that the law of impermanence is expressed. Elsewhere we see it says all conditioned things are impermanent. In this case, that conditionality is expressed in terms of what was born, Bhuta, it says what was created. It's the Bhuta is referring to becoming, our being, our existence, coming into existence in some realm of existence. So coming to be as a human, coming to be as an angel or a deva, coming to be as an animal. One comes to be into a particular existence, into some realm or some universe of existence. So all those who were born, all those who came to be, and then all which is conditioned, everything that's the result of preceding conditions. All those things are liable to wear out. And he says that such conditioned things would be, should fail to wear out or come to their end, is not possible. The theme that I've been developing over the past couple of weeks about the death contemplation is that for a person who is unprepared or who is not independent in the Dhamma, or a person who is still subject to attachment in their social relationships, then the death of a friend or a dear and delightful person is always, it's never the right time, it's always a kind of a catastrophe, it's always has a way of turning one's world upside down and then causing the outbreak of grief, a sense that part of one's own identity is not just like individually what we think we are within ourselves, but we know who we are in relationship to those who are around us. So a child or a member of a family knows who they are in relationship to their blood relatives or to the birth family and the family friends. And then a person who's a disciple of the Buddha might know who they are in relationship to their kalyanamitas, their spiritual friends, that they receive counseling and mentorship from their friends. So their spiritual guides or their teachers see them, observe them, know them, and understand them. And then there's a kind of like a reflection that helps them to know where they're on the right track or where they're on the wrong track. So we depend on getting that feedback loop from our friends as being an aspect of our spiritual development. And then, to that extent, to which extent we had not really examined and gained dispassionate or a detachment from those connections, then to that extent, experiencing of the death of another is traumatic. But if impermanence, instead of being something that's sort of like accidental, unplanned, unpredictable, landing on us like a ton of bricks, instead there's another type of impermanence which is lawful, orderly, and which is proceeding according to universal laws that we can count on. And I've been comparing this to the progression of the stars across the night sky with the rotation of the earth, that movement of the stars is proceeding in a perfectly lawful, orderly way. And the movement of the planets through the constellation of the stars is also proceeding in that kind of an orderly and lawful way. So then, instead of feeling a disturbance about it, we feel it is just a kind of a comfort, actually, a beauty or a confidence in knowing this is the law, they go according to the law. And so the same way, if we can reflect, and when we have the shock of death, if we reflect, this is a universal law, then we can bring our mind back to stability, and we can be comforted, and we can remove the disturbance. The Buddha is continuing. Suppose there was a large tree standing with heartwood, and the largest branch fell off. In the same way, in the great Sangha that stands with heartwood, Sariputta has become fully extinguished. How could it possibly be that what is born, created, conditioned, and liable to wear out should not wear out? That is not possible. So, Ananda, live as your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Let the teaching be your island and your refuge, with no other refuge. And how does a mendicant do that? It's when a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. This is the formula for the 4 foundations of mindfulness. They meditate observing an aspect of feelings, mind, and principles. Or you could say they meditate observing the body in the body, the feelings in the feelings, the mind in the mind, and the Dhamma in the Dhamma. Keen, aware, mindful, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. Now I want to circle back to this very crucial passage. So Ananda, live as your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. It's a very famous sentence. The same lesson was given to Ananda when the Buddha was coming near to his own death in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. All the more so, Ananda was distraught, disturbed, shaken up, and the Buddha gave him this lesson. The phrase atta dipa, atta is the reflexive pronoun, it means your own, and then dipa has 2 meanings. One is an island, and another is a light. Sometimes this phrase is translated like be a light unto yourself, but in the commentary it says to be an island unto yourself. And then it says live with the Dhamma as your island, the Dhamma as your refuge. So this could maybe be confusing. So am I supposed to make myself the refuge, or am I supposed to make the Dhamma the refuge? That's one way that a student could question this passage. Is the Dhamma, and then it says to dwell with yourself as an island. And so, well, it would make some kind of sense to be dwelling on an island, but it doesn't make sense to be dwelling in light. But on the other hand, considering the Dhamma as a light, because the Dhamma sort of illuminates the truth. So this is the way that different writers or students have talked themselves into being confused by their sentence. And then elsewhere, those of a Brahmanical a disposition who believed in the soul theory and who wanted to argue that the Buddha was actually bringing the soul, the Atman as the Brahmanical soul idea, back into the teachings, that he's saying that you should take your soul as your island, your soul as your refuge. So we have, we can pretty well dispense with that idea about taking Atta as soul. There's a good essay about this by A.K. Warder, the great grammar teacher of Pali grammar, who writes about this passage at length, and he says Atta is one of the meanings is just simply as the reflexive pronoun for yourself or your own. And then the island idea, I believe that this island idea is in connection with flood. So if you lived on a wide floodplain, and then during the rainy season when the water rises, there's a few islands within the floodplain. And so then you can get up onto the island and you will be above the level of the water. And so then there's just a little bit like a different type of vegetation on these small islands. I experienced this years ago when I was hiking in Florida, in the grassy sections of Florida where this vast grassland would be an underwater marsh during the rainy season, and then there were just a few of these humps that you could get up, and so that would be the island, and so then the floods. That's like the flood of ignorance, the flood of sensual desire, the flood of aversion, the flood of existence, the flood of views, and so the island is then, it is your refuge, it's your place of safety from being swept away by those floods. It's your place of stability. So the island and the refuge are really two different statements that are very close to being the same kind of idea. And in my opinion, actually, the following passage about saying, how do we do this? We do this by practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This shows us how the Attadipa, making yourself an island, and the Dhammadipa, making the Dhamma an island, those are actually the same thing. Because when you practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and you contemplate and investigate the nature of this body, the nature of feelings, the nature of those states of mind, and the nature of the Dhamma, or the principles or the patterns that can be discovered through this introspection. then that which is like the teaching of the Buddha, the lessons that you've heard, and what you can discover through introspection by looking within, looking directly to your own experience, you find that they're matching, that they match up. You discover the congruity between what you realize directly for yourself and what is the teachings of the Buddha. And then when those things become matched up, then the Dhamma as something, what you heard when you listened to the suttas, and then the Dhamma being what you discovered when you did the Dhamma, Nudhamma, Patipatya, that when you practiced the Dhamma according to the Dhamma, and when you practiced the mindful contemplation of the Dhamma, then the two things are the same. There's one other way that seems like it could be relevant, and the other reason why it seems very useful to me to think of this atadipa as being like a reflexive pronoun and not as being a backdoor teaching about the eternal soul or something like that. To dwell, to live as your own island seems to me, it has a connotation of seclusion. So a person who is forever living in dependence on being around their charismatic teacher or being around the society of other spiritual friends or being around society and loved ones in order to feel safe, and one who somebody like that could even be uncomfortable or nervous if they have to be alone and have to be isolated. But the Buddha recommends that for the purpose of meditation, that it is necessary to withdraw from society. So even if we had a great meditation teacher, we would, if we know how to get the gain from this practice, we would go respectfully to that teacher and ask them to give us teaching in brief, so that we could then take that teaching and go into seclusion, and then with ardency and dedication, practice on our own with that teaching to try to realize as much as we can with that teaching through our own personal efforts, and without being continuously in a dependent, relationship. So the Buddha wanted his disciples to become independent in the Dhamma. He didn't want them to be, hanging onto his skirt as being like little children who were unable to be independent in the Dhamma. And the sense of seclusion means both seclusion from people and seclusion from sensual pleasures, which is in part just things that are sensual pleasures, and also seclusion from like everything to do with the worldly gains, being having the barn and the cows and the wealth and the servants and the money in the bank and the barn full of produce and a healthy herd of cattle and a lot of employees and 20 children, and each child has 20 grandchildren, and so you've got all of these descendants, and all of them are still alive, and so that's kind of another like a meaning of sensual pleasure. So we've got to be secluded from all of that. We've got to go to an island and be and really just be alone with ourselves. subsequently, we've got that seclusion from the unwholesome states of mind, and subsequently to that, we gain seclusion from clinging to existence at the most subtle level, when we really are reaching that for which we started this practice, when we're getting close to it, and we may be able to let go of all those subtle levels of conceit, and then that would be like the ultimate kind of seclusion. So you could think that this one, powerful sentence, "Atta Dipa Viharata," live as your own island, implies all of that. Looking at who's present in the room, I don't think I need to review in a lot of depth the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This is Kaya Anupasi. This is seeing the body in the body. Viharati, that's dwelling, seeing the body in the body. Atapi, this is with ardency. Sampajanya, this is with clear comprehension. Satima is with mindfulness. And then Vinaya means having subdued in the world abhijja, domanassa, that's greed and domanassa is like mental pain or displeasure in connection to the world. And likewise for feelings, for the 3 kinds of feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, for the various states of mind which are offered in the foundations of mindfulness, such as the chitta, the mind, or you could say the intentionality, which is affected by greed or free from greed, affected by aversion, free from aversion, which is bounded or limited, or which is unbounded, unlimited, or the state of mind which is distracted, or the state of mind which is sunken. And then under the principles, some teachers believe that the most significant dhammas to practice in terms of the foundations of mindfulness are the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of awakening, so that you know whether or not those hindrances are present or are they not present. You know whether the factors of awakening are still absent or whether they have come into to be. And then if you know about those factors, how to recognize those factors, then you know what to do as far as the mental purification and cultivation. And then in the extended version given in the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, it expounds in a very beautiful summary the understanding of the 5 aggregates, that's form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. Those are, it's a psychological summary of what makes up an individual, or alternatively understanding the senses, the 6 senses, and the fetter that arises as a result of sense contact, or else understanding the 4 Noble Truths, and understanding the Eightfold Noble Path. All of those things are the concise summary of the teaching of the Dhamma. And indeed, if you didn't have the opportunity to have the internet and to be able to look up a gazillion words about the Dhamma, but if you only had one sutta, and if that sutta was the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the long version of the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, and then if somehow you just had a chance to understand that sutta, that would indeed be all that you would need for your liberation. And so in the conclusion, the Buddha says, whether now or after I have passed. See, this is the foretelling of the trauma that's going to happen to the entire Buddhist world when the Buddha has his parinibbana, and the monks then have to face a world without their teacher. After I have passed, any who shall live as their own island, their own refuge, with no other refuge, with the teaching as their island and their refuge, with no other refuge, those mendicants of mine who want to train shall be among the best of the best. The second sutta that I have to share with you is 85% the same, so it won't take long to discuss. But now I would like to invite your questions or comments. What do you think is the best translation of Attadipa Viharata, which Bhante Sujata translated as you should dwell as your own island? Okay, Richard.
Thank you. I think there's a problem with the translation of the word atta. Many times it's translated as self, but it actually means permanent self. So when we're using it and Buddha's saying, so what do you think of the eye, bhikkhus? Is it permanent or impermanent? It's impermanent. That's why it's not the atta. It's not a permanent thing. So it's being impermanent, it cannot possibly be self. So in this one, it's saying Attadipa, right? He's saying, make that permanent self your island. Now, an island in Indian thought includes the great continent of India. That was Jambudvipa, okay, in Sanskrit. The island. So even the size of continents was considered islands. In the West, we have a tendency to think of the word island because of English usage as a more smaller thing. It can be fairly large. They're fairly large islands, but we don't think of them as continents, right? But actually, it's an island. So this is a great thing, right? And viharati, right? To abide, right? So use that island of your permanent self to abide is what it's really saying here. And then it says atasarana. So make that permanent self your shelter. Now I know this is very controversial what I'm saying, but as Bhikkhu Bodhi explained in one of his lectures, there's nowhere in the suttas where Buddha says that there's no self. The concept of no self is used about 6 times. I know because I looked up the Pali on this in the first 4 Nikayas. Okay, but Buddha never says in using those words no self. There's like questions from Vacchagotta about it. You know, do I have a self? Do I not have a self? Right, like that. And Buddha says, well, if I said there was no self, I would be siding with the annihilationists. But he doesn't say that there's no self. He says, if I use that term, if I said, well, no, you have no self, but you're good. He says, I'd be doing this, which he considers to be a wrong idea, right? And if he says, do I have a self? He says, then I would be siding with the eternalist. And he describes in the suttas what he means by annihilationist, what he means by eternalist. And they're very interesting descriptions. I won't go into it right now because it would take a while, but they're not necessarily what you might think when you hear these terms, okay? So in the same way, if you notice when it talks about Dhammadipa, right, Viharata is not used there. It's absent. Although the Dhammadipa and the Dhammasarana are there, right? Vihara is not in the middle. And Dhamma, right? So what he's saying is that, you know, I prefer to translate Dhamma as objective reality, right? He's saying use objective reality itself as an island. Use objectively itself as your shelter. What he means by that is your understanding of objective reality, that you see what objective reality is, right? And due to that knowledge, you don't get caught up in it. You don't run into it. You say, okay, enough of that. I know what it is. I know how it works. I know everything about it. So I'm, moving away from that, right? That's the whole point of Buddhist teaching, right? Is to move away from samsara, okay? And that's why he uses the idea of an island, although I liked a lot of your description there, but the ocean of samsara, right? It's called the ocean. You get out of the ocean and get on the land, on the continent or whatever. That doesn't matter so much the size, but as long as it's safe and it can't be affected anymore by the ocean. So you escape samsara and get on the continent, get on the safe land, protecting yourself like that. But I know this is quite controversial, and sometimes people think of atta as soul, but the word for soul in Pali is jiva. It's not atta. Okay, atta means specifically permanent self. Jiva means soul, and this is related to a Greek term, which I can't remember what the term is right now, which has the same context, but the translation is life force. It's the life force. So there were many, many philosophers, both in Greece and then in India, who are looking for the life force. What is animating this body? What is bringing it to life? So some people think the breath. That's why, like in the Bible, God makes Adam out of clay, and then he blows his breath. God blows his breath into Adam, and it animates him. So some people think it's air. Some people think it's water. Some people think it's earth. Some people think it's fire. That's why you've got the Brahman fire worshippers, right? So each group psychologically was trying to figure out what is the animation, how is this body alive in this world? How are we experiencing this world? What is keeping this body alive? So that's what we know as the word soul, and that actually means life force. What is the life force? What is making this happen? But that's very different from the idea of atta, of permanent self. And I think when you come across this translation, if you know it to be atta underneath, when you look at the English translation of self and you know it to be atta, it's good to remind yourself that atta means permanent self. And that's why Buddha is always contrasting it with how something is impermanent. Is this impermanent? Yes. Okay. Well, that can't possibly be the atta, like that, and so you'll get the idea. And then that's why I like to point out that there's one thing the Buddha never says is not self, but is highly, highly found many, 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 many instances, as much as anything else throughout the suttas in the Pali, and that's the ceto, the mind. There's no sutta where Buddha ever says ceto is not self. He says chitta, which are states of mind, because those come and go. So those can't possibly be the self. And mana, which is also sometimes translated as mind, that conceit, that false idea that causes you to falsely identify, he also says that that's not self. But he never says ceto is not self, and he uses the word ceto many, 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 many times, or ceta. So Anyway, I know this is extremely controversial, what I'm saying, and because a certain doctrinal idea arose over time, but that doctrinal idea is mostly from the commentaries and from other writers throughout time. You don't, if you look at the pure Pali words, you don't see that concept being presented in the Pali. And remember that the people that Buddha was talking with, this was the common everyday language. Buddha said, present this teaching in the common so that everybody could understand it. So those people at that time would have very clearly understood, what these terms mean, in their language. But later on, as it became a dead language, as language changed and moved on, that and therefore they were trying to analyze. It's like Latin. They were trying to analyze this old language. They were trying to figure out what these things meant, and they came to various conclusions. And not all of them are correct. Anyways,
Okay.
I hope this doesn't offend anybody in
I'm
the
going
audience,
to
but
differ from
that's
you.
what I wanted to say. Yes,
According
that's fine.
according to Warder, atta, when it's a noun, it means the self. Atta, when it's a pronoun, is the reflexive pronoun. And then atta, when it's an adverb, it means by oneself. There are millions of occurrences in the canon where atta as the reflexive pronoun simply means one's own. Like I put on my socks in the morning. Like that is, these are not doctrinal, this is just ordinary commonplace usage. I want to give another kind of a sense, the reason for this reading about atta, in this case, be Rhode Island. In the specific context of this one, you had the disciple who was depending on another. He was depending on his dear beloved friend and teacher. And now that teacher is gone. And the Buddha is saying, you're not going to be destroyed because that teacher upon whom you depended is gone, because you can depend on yourself. And the reason why I find this actually very important and kind of in a poignant way is that, for a long time, I had understood like one set of teachings about coping with death, coping with the dukkha of separation of death and all of that, and then sort of like a different a set of teachings about the tilakkhana, about the 3 marks of existence, which is more, you could say philosophical, but just like observing what's like the nature of reality. If you here's a theory, is it permanent or impermanent? Just watch and look and see and find out whether conditioned things are permanent or impermanent, and one can discover the result. But then when you see the teaching about impermanence arising out of that poignant, heartfelt circumstance of when, because of death, we are cut off from the good friend upon whom we depended. And knowing that that loss need not destroy us because we can rely on ourselves. This is why I have the idea that the universal law of impermanence and the stability of the universal law of impermanence, then that becomes like the island or the rock, the point of stability, that no matter how much loss that one could experience during a whole lifetime, even somebody could have a long life and they could find that all the people they know pass away before they do. It could happen. So then, there's the stability and the Dhamma that then becomes it just becomes this stable point where one can emerge from being caught up in aversion, caught up in mental disturbance, and then because of being able to stabilize the mind, being secluded from the upset or the loss or the reactivity, then one is in a position to be able to practice meditation, because you can't practice meditation if you're completely caught up in stress. So I kind of started to see this teaching about impermanence as being like tremendously grounded in compassion, in the Buddha's guidance to help people find the way to emerge from grief and to find a space of safety where they could go on with their training. Let me call on Sheila.
Good afternoon, Aya. It's good to be back. I am hardly as articulate and knowledgeable about Pali and the discourses as Richard, but something occurs to me that it's almost like the death contemplation and impermanence is not only directly connected, of course, with dying and the impermanence of a physical body, but I'm thinking of it also as a metaphor for for our lives on a daily basis. So as you were beginning the sutta discussion, what occurred to me around death is dear ones who give us gifts and give us things, and that tendency to hold on, even when at some point in that atta, you know that it's time to let it go, or you want to pass it on or move it out of your life. And there's this thing that just keeps you from letting that go. So that's something that I see and then just in terms of my own practice, and today has been greatly helpful, but I just see it as a metaphor, just the physical understanding of impermanence and death as in the end of our lives, as really looking at things moment to moment that are leaving us and that need to leave us. Thank you.
Yes, and that's the logical result of the practice. I know that, Sheila, that you've spoken before about the way in which the kind of social relationships tends to be as we practice more, it becomes a bit more burdensome, and one is willing to step back about it and have a more simplified and peaceful life without being that much involved with, or being less involvement with all of our friends, and that is exactly part of this pattern of learning to let go, allowing impermanence to happen, not trying to block the flow of impermanence by, grasping and holding on to things. It's today is the 20th anniversary of my novice ordination. Somebody asked me if I could give them a copy of a photograph of my novice ordination, and I had to say that I'm so glad to say that 90% of all the photos that I ever owned were out in the forest at our hermitage, and they all got moldy, and I threw them all away. And so I don't have photographs from and 20, except for very few. I lost all those memorials and souvenirs, and so this this thing of like not keeping souvenirs and having an attitude. We combine gratitude and appreciation with detachment and being able to step away, to allow the circumstances to flow on. If it becomes other, we don't have to be causing that to be a disturbance or something that we need to try to overturn, because we know the change is keeping on happening. Now I'll call on Nirmala.
Thank you, Aya. Thank you also for sharing that today is the 20th anniversary of your ordination. And thank you for sharing that all the pictures got destroyed and you don't have any to them. I think that's such a powerful teaching. So thank you for that. And I had a question. I always considered anatta, maybe I consider atta to be the Sanskrit equivalent of atma, and anatta is anatma. So soul, no soul. Soul in Hinduism is our self, which is unchanging, right? Permanent self beyond body and mind. There is a soul which is permanent, and anatta is no soul. So, which I think very well translates in some ways. Dipama said, what is reborn is wisdom, not soul. So that's one way to look at it. Am I wrong in my understanding?
To my knowledge, the Atman is what you described in Hinduism or in the Upanishads or the previous teachings. And as I was trying to enunciate this, that I just learned this morning with this clarity. The Pali word atta, when it's a noun, it has that meaning. The atta, which is the same as the Sanskrit atman.
Okay.
When atta is a pronoun, that's simply the reflexive pronoun, meaning like my, or for oneself. I like that. And it's got a more like just a simple, ordinary meaning, not the same meaning as atman. And when it's used as an adverb, it also has that kind of like a simple, reflexive meaning. But the deep question that Richard is broaching about some people think that when the Buddha taught the teaching about anatta, some people express that as saying the Buddha said there is no self, and it could be more accurate to say that, like, if you look at the aggregates, or you look at the possessions, or you look here, you look there, or you look for the self and you can't find it. So a lot of the things that we think are the self are not the self, and that the teaching about like trying to find one's salvation by getting in touch with the self, or discovering the Atman, was not what the Buddha find was the path that leads to the end of suffering. Mm-hmm. So instead, the Buddha taught letting go of attachment as the way to the end of dukkha. But if he said there is no self, at one place he said, if I taught that, then some of the I don't know, because the eternalist school, they would become so scared they wouldn't be able to listen to the teachings, and they would become so upset because they said the Buddha is trying to destroy myself. And so instead, by kind of like a Socratic method, I know that we could say maybe Socrates was using a Buddhistic method instead of that the Buddha was using a Socratic method, but he's inviting them to look and see, can you find the self here? Can you find the self there? Can you find the self there? And finally to let go.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Aya.
I'll call on Ren.
Thank you, Aya. About the self and permanent self and whatnot, I think this is just my opinion without, in-depth knowledge of the scripture, but just from what I understand and heard, it feels like it's such an unfortunate attachment to saying, oh, Buddha's distinction between Buddhas and Hinduism, for example, is that the Buddha teaches there's no self. And in Hinduism, so therefore that's the distinction. It's almost like an unfortunate attachment, it feels, because the important thing really is to not be attached to anything permanent. There's no permanence. That is the point. But yeah, there's just so much debate over whether there's a self or no self, if Buddha really taught that or not. But yeah. But what I was gonna ask was this idea of retreating from social engagement or ourselves as an island, so that because at one point it is a necessary step. And I'm thinking, what about Sangha? What about, Dhamma friends? Is that part of what you're retreating from as a necessary step? Because if that is true, that means you're completely alone in a human form still. So that is such a non-negotiable thing. We cannot truly be alone if we're still in human form. So that's troubling to me.
Mm-hmm. What a wonderful question. The Buddha said both things. He said, rely on yourself, be an island unto yourself. And he said that there's no salvation without the Kalyanamitta. The Kalyanamitta is 100% of the path. So then my understanding is that certainly from time to time, one should be able to withdraw from being socially involved and to go into a solitary situation for the purpose of developing meditation. And that solitude is a very, very helpful thing to develop that capacity. And one should also be in recognizing actually that it's strange that it's not really given as like one of the four nutriments is like social contact, and yet it's very clear that like humans are the type of animal that is sort of made to have social contacts and social connections. So the in our modern civilization is very individualistic, and it seems like the fault of our civilization is being too individualistic and lonely, and that we need to be able to find a way to have more meaningful, healthy, and beneficial connections in our life, and then in the traditional society of India, as perhaps in many other traditional societies, the family or the society is so interconnected all the time that it's almost as if like a person doesn't actually have their own identity apart from their family. Like your family, your work, your village, your social connections, and I'm the carpenter in this village, or I'm the farmer in this village, and all of my my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents were all the carpenter in this village, and it's the tradition of our family, and I just don't have any choice except to carry on the family lineage, because that's my inheritance, so that like my work and my friends and my social connections and everything is all interconnected. And if you took me out of the village and put me in a city, it would be almost like I would be traumatized because of losing my identity, because my sense of who I am. This is psychological identity, not this Brahmanical soul, but is so like tied up in that. So for those people who had the cultural problem in that culture of being too much interdependent with their family and their group, the Buddha was telling them that you need to be able to withdraw from the family. I said the household life is dusty. I need to get away from this web of entanglement and go off by myself into the forest to practice and to seek and to discover my own understanding of the answers, apart from the answers that are being fed to me by my society and my culture. So I don't think it's not really an absolute answer, but one should, at least for the sake of meditation, I believe that one should be able to be on one's own and to have like a seclusion. There's another kind of, I don't know if you call it meditation, but there's a kind of a prayer or a spiritual kind of an exercise that can happen where you have a large congregation of people who are gathered together, and they can you can get into, I guess, like it's a hive mentality, or a kind of like a group experience, or some kind of like being spiritually transported as part of some kind of a group spiritual experience. And I'm quite sure that the Buddha doesn't recommend that he recommends going off alone into the seclusion of the forest and practicing alone. So that's
Right.
my answer to that.
So practicing, but not necessarily as like a progressive end to what one should be in the practice, right? That you should be able to do it alone, but you can come out and be part of Sangha as well, right? It's not like ultimately that's where that's the end point, is it?
Well, the Buddha is an example of someone who realized the end point. And every day he got up and cast his Dhamma eye over the world and looked for beings who were able to benefit from the teachings. And he exerted his energy to go out and offer teachings to people who could benefit from his teachings. So in that way he was connected. But then in another way, when his two favorite disciples passed away, he didn't shed a tear or feel any grief at all about it, because he just said, well, it's impermanent. So he was not dependent on the social connections, even though he was serving society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can come back to Richard, and then I'm going to take a minute after this just to go back to the second sutta, which is almost exactly the same. It's just one sentence different. Richard.
Thank you, Raya. This idea of going off to practice alone, there's a sutta where the Buddha's personal attendant got the, feeling that he wanted to go off and practice alone. And he told the Buddha, hey, I'd like to go off into seclusion, so I could really, make an effort. And Buddha tells him, well, just you and me are here. Why don't you wait for a while? Some more bhikkhus will come along at some point, and otherwise I'll be left alone, and then you can go. And but he kept persisting, and so finally Buddha said, okay, go ahead, go. And when he went, but the Buddha knew he wasn't ready to go completely by himself. In other words, one has to develop their mind and their consciousness to a certain point where they're really ready to go. It's like the saying where Buddha says, a person who gets the idea that let my blood and everything just dry up, but I'll just sit here, and make an effort. Well, it so happens that when you get to that mental point, if you're really at that mental point, like the Buddha did the last time he sat down, it only took him several more hours and he was the Buddha, completely enlightened. In other words, it's not that in Buddhism you're expected to get this idea that and just go and like starve yourself to death or something sitting down. It's not like that. It's that let your mind get to that point that you're so one-pointed in wanting to attain enlightenment that you're going to push through. So in the same way, this monk then went off, and he surely wasn't ready. He had all kinds of mental problems and everything, and he had to come back to the Buddha and said, yeah, that didn't work out too well for me. I'm just paraphrasing, but so it's not that everyone, goes off, just to be by themselves. Really, you need to reach a certain state of competence in understanding the Dharma and in your meditation abilities and things like that. And then you can make great benefit in a short amount of time. Many times it says in the sutta, and then not long thereafter, he became one of the arahants. Now, sometimes there's these commentaries that say, well, actually it was 10 years in that case, but no, that someone just wrote that in the commentary. If it says not long thereafter, it's really not long thereafter. No one thinks of 10 years as a short time, unless you're thinking some total infinite time abstract idea or something like that. And there's just too many cases like that throughout the sutta. So I would say for an individual, don't put a lot of burden on yourself like that, thinking that you're supposed to be up in a cave meditating or something like that, unless you've developed yourself sufficiently to that point. But another point is that, remember, was it Aniruddha and his two friends, and the Buddha went to see them, and the Buddha praised them. They were all living together, close friends, but they were, really practicing fervently and studying the Dharma and things like that. And he says, yeah, this is really the good way, this is the good, so they weren't each individually off by themselves, either at that point, and the Buddha also talks about how he could be criticized. Someone says there were 5 reasons why they praised the Buddha. And one was he lived in seclusion. And the Buddha says, no, sometimes I'm surrounded by kings and ministers and wealthy families and all kinds of people all the time. I'm not always in seclusion. So one could say my disciple is superior to me, in that case, if that's what it meant to, really have perfected and understood the Dharma. So these things are kind of fluid, but I would say don't put too much burden on your own mind thinking that, you're not a good Buddhist or something if you're not up in a cave or under a tree somewhere out in the forest by yourself, for years on end or something like that. It's really not a requirement. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
If you'll favor me, I'd like to just briefly read you the following sutta, which is a continuation of the same story. This is 47.14 in the Samyutta Nikaya. Excuse me. Ukkachela. The Buddha was staying at the land of the Vajis near Ukkachela on the bank of the Ganges River, together with a large sangha of mendicants. It was not long after Sariputta and Moggallana had become fully extinguished. Now, at that time, the Buddha was sitting in the open, surrounded by the sangha. Excuse me, I'm just having a coughing jag here. Okay. Mendicants, this assembly seems empty to me now that Sariputta and Moggallana have become fully extinguished. When Sariputta and Moggallana were alive, my assembly was never empty. I had no concern for any region where they stayed. The Buddhas of the past or the future have pairs of chief disciples who are no better than Sariputta and Moggallana were to me. It's an incredible and amazing quality of such disciples that they fulfill the teacher's instructions and follow his advice. They're liked and approved, respected and admired by the four assemblies. It's an incredible and amazing quality of the realized one that when such a pair of disciples becomes fully extinguished, he does not sorrow or lament. How could it possibly be so that what is born, created, conditioned, and liable to wear out should not wear out? This is not possible. And now the remainder of the sutta is the same as what we just read. So the quality of the realized one is that even when his pair of disciples is fully extinguished, he does not sorrow or lament. Why? Because he knows this. When a large tree standing with a heartwood and the large branch falls off, in the same way the great sangha stands with the heartwood, Sariputta and Moggallana have become fully extinguished. It could not be. How could it be that what is born, created, conditioned, and liable to wear out should not wear out? That is not possible. So be your mendicants, live as your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Let the teachings be your island and your refuge, with no other refuge. How to do this? By practicing the four foundations of mindfulness, by observing the body in the body, feelings in feelings, mind in mind, and the Dhamma in the Dhamma. Keen, aware, mindful, rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world. Whether now or after I have passed, any who shall live as their own island, their own refuge, with no other refuge, with the teaching as their island and their refuge, with no other refuge. Those mendicants of mine who want to train shall be among the best of the best. And so this is the contrasting case. So, as is often the case, Ananda has a kind of a role in many of the stories as representing the common man, a person who has ordinary emotional responses, or one who's able to be confused or able to make mistakes. And so he's kind of like set up to give a demonstration of those mistakes, which the Buddha, never in a spirit of being harsh or cruel, instead with a tremendous compassion and even a kind of like a tenderness. So, dear Ananda, don't grieve, don't worry. Practice in this way, and you will reach the goal. you will get the result if you practice in this way. So I welcome everyone to continue with this contemplation. I'll call on Ren.
Thank you. I just am not sure. Earlier when you were reading, it said the Buddha said, it feels empty or it feels quiet with both of the disciples gone, and when they were here, it did not. I don't remember exactly what, but my question is, it seems like the Buddha was very much affected by whether the disciples were there or not. I don't quite understand that, the content or the meaning of that piece of sutta.
When Sariputta and Moggallana were alive, my assembly was never empty. I had no concern for any region where they stayed. I don't know what the commentary is, the meaning of this asunya, never empty. It could just mean that there were a lot of always a lot of an adequate number of supporters and disciples at all different levels who would be around, while Sariputta and Moggallana are present. I don't know if it has a deeper meaning than that. But he's saying that these disciples had these amazing qualities. And then he says, I myself have an amazing quality. And my amazing quality is that when such a pair becomes fully extinguished, it's an amazing quality of the realized one, that's the archetype, himself or any fully realized Buddha. When the pair of disciples becomes fully extinguished, he does not sorrow or lament. So even when they are so great and so important, nevertheless, he does not lament when they pass away.
Right. That was the point of the sutta, not the earlier part. I think it was just a little confusing to me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was reading it quickly.
No, it wasn't because that. It just seems like never empty. I don't know if that's a lead in to something else, but it sounds like they're just a side branch.
Yeah. Okay. Let us pay respects to the Triple Gem, and I am really grateful for this conversation and for all of your good practice and your patient listening. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Subhakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami.